with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Lee Hepner, senior legal counsel for the American Economic Liberties Project, on the death of net neutrality again. Then Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, on a couple of pieces he's done on right-wing militias, including a guy who went undercover for 2 years with the American Patriot 3%ers. Also on the program today, the DOJ to release Jack Smith's report on Trump's January 6th case. The document case will be given just to top congressional leaders, therefore avoiding Trump Judge Cannon's ruling that release of that report should be enjoined. Meanwhile, wildfires rage around LA, forcing evacuation of over 30,000 at least. Democrats retain control of the Virginia legislature in special election wins. North Carolina Supreme Court blocks the state from certifying one of its fellow judges, just happens to be a Democrat, from winning their Supreme Court race. House passes a bill targeting undocumented immigrants charged with things as minor as shoplifting. Meanwhile, also allowing red state governors, really any governors, to essentially control federal immigration policy. DOJ sues 6 major landlords over a rent-fixing scheme via RealPage software. And the DOJ's Inspector General issues a report saying that senior Department of Justice officials under the Trump administration started investigations of Democratic governors around the issue of COVID and then leaked that information to the press to influence the 2020 election. In other words, weaponizing the DOJ. Israel kills 50 more Gazans in supposed safe zone. Well over 150 killed since the new year. 24 million folks sign up for the ACA coverage in 2024, breaking a new record in the wake of subsidies via the Inflation Reduction Act. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Emma.
Hump Day. It is Hump Day. Yes.
There you go. We've made it.
We have.
This is the first full week we've been back in 2025.
I know.
Well, it's not full week yet, but
it feels disorienting.
It feels a little disorienting. I'm fighting off some weird cold or something. I think probably people can hear it. But I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I got that too. I'm sniffling over here, but it's cold in New York right now. The wind chill is like 8 degrees.
Meanwhile, what's going on in California is absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
A good buddy of mine lives in Glendale. If he looks out his back window, he sees smoke. If he looks out his front window, he sees smoke coming from another direction. The winds there are topping out at 100 miles per hour. There hasn't been virtually any rain
Since
in
like
California
Right.
for almost half a year more. And these fires in the Palisades, I mean, this is very, very close to we're not out in the woods here. This isn't in remote areas. My sister's best friend's kid's school burned down out there, but
Awful.
it's also happening from the east and the west of LA. So real disaster. I hope folks stay safe out there. At least 30,000 have evacuated. I suspect that number is much higher, but they're not all forced evacuations, although people are trying to get ahead of this thing. I want to go in a story I mentioned yesterday because this is really important, and it's important just in and of itself. But as we get more data out as to why Democrats lost, and I phrase it that way specifically based upon the data. There's a good piece. I think he's got a Substack, Michael Podhorzer. He was the former political director for the AFL-CIO. Now does data analysis. Long story short, the bottom line is that the election in 2024 was not an embrace of Republicans or MAGA beyond what it was in 2020. It was essentially a vote of no confidence in Democrats. And most of that vote of no confidence came by just staying home. He's done an extensive report here, but essentially, the popular vote result was almost entirely a collapse in support for Harris and Democrats, not an increase in support for Trump and Republicans. Essentially, most of Harris's losses were due to an anti-MAGA surge of voters staying home. The people who came out motivated by negative partisanship in 2018 and in 2020, and to some extent, less so in 2022, just essentially stayed home in 2024. And there's a couple of things that you can garner from that. One is people didn't have a sense of what Trump's policies were, or they weren't worried about it in the way to motivate them to come out and vote for Harris. They weren't motivated to vote for him, but they weren't motivated to leave. And there was nothing that the Democrats were offering, or at least communicating as to what they were offering, that motivated these people to leave their homes and come out and vote for Harris. Trump essentially got the same percentage of eligible voters as he did in 2020. And obviously that number goes up because our populations go up. Whereas Harris essentially got 19 million votes less, or as to what she would have had she hit the same number of eligible, same portion of eligible voters had voted for her.
Right. It's also the first time since the 1960s that a majority of Americans in the lower income voting bloc, which is voters earning less than $50,000 a year, voted Republican in terms of that majority share. And you can probably draw a line to when we see how Democrats lost so much ground in urban areas in blue states, right? Those are probably more low propensity Democratic partisans who didn't show out. And the question is then why are we tailoring these campaigns to suburbanites? But also, frankly, how much did the genocide in Gaza and the administration's support of that, and how it just showed such a lack of regard for the lives of people who are not white or wealthy, really? How much that affected turnout. I think that based on what we saw in AOC asking her constituents, she has a majority Latino district, the exact kind of district they lost ground in. What that was one of the many reasons that were listed and given to her as to why people didn't show up.
I think absolutely, and again, we've talked about this ad nauseum. I think it's like there's a first order people who refused to vote based upon what was happening in Gaza, and then the second order in that a lot of activists who may have actually gone out and cast a vote for Harris, but were just less motivated and found it more difficult to go motivate people. And I don't know if we'll ever know specifically how those break down. It's possible that the first order numbers could actually be higher than the second order, but certainly they combine. And then on top of that, you also have to remember, I mean, despite the fact that, we got Chuck Schumer saying that this weekend that Democratic voters didn't know what Joe Biden did for them. And
whose fault is that?
They weren't empathetic enough.
It's Biden's fault for being unable to communicate and hanging in there. And also, if that's the case, that's still a problem with the party structure, because you have to be able to do politics if you're a political party.
But I would also argue that there was also a failure to recognize a lot of the loss that took place under Biden, even from stuff that Biden and the Democrats provided in the first place. But to expect this cohort of voters to be savvy enough to know that something that they got that came a month after Donald Trump left office and then was taken away 2 years into Biden's administration, they're not going around going like, well, if it was only for, it's a bummer about that $300 per child tax credit that I'm not getting anymore. But I know it was Joe Manchin and it was Kristen Sinema. I mean, this gets to, and we said this at the time, the failure of Biden to strike while the iron was hot. And in the spring of 2021, coming off the big win for the American Rescue Act, when Republicans were still talking about Dr. Seuss not publishing 2 of its books or something, and Joe Manchin was talking, maybe Build Back Better should actually be bigger than what Bernie says. Maybe it should be $6 trillion. That was the time to strike. But instead, what Joe Biden did is invite Republicans in to give them a proposal over the course of 2 months. Then when that failed, invited Sinema and Portman to come in and provide their attempt at, some bipartisanship for Build Back Better. And this is a mistake that the Republicans will not make. They will not make. They have 3 more votes in the Senate than the Democrats did, but that's not enough to overcome a filibuster. And they may not have a Manchin in Sinema, but in the summer of 2021, in the spring of 2021, Manchin was not Manchin yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was certainly latent. But this is why failures of actually legislation and legislating and leading implicate an election. I know this sounds crazy 3 years later, but I also bring this up because one of the myths that are going around is one that it was an immigration question, because there's no evidence that immigration drove more votes to Donald Trump because he got essentially the same share of the electorate as he did in 2020. And I also want to say the same thing for the culture war waged against trans people. There is no suggestion, the idea that people were enraged about trans. Are Trump voters upset about trans people? Yes, that's their aggrievement du jour. But that didn't create any new voters for Trump.
Right. In 2022, the Republicans, without Trump at the top of the ticket, were did not do well running on transphobia as one of their central planks.
Absolutely not. And I just want to go over this. AP, I mentioned this yesterday, but this is very important to understand, because the people out there who are talking about we have some type of social contagion, the people who are talking about trans rights are overcoming everything, and you can't send your kid to school without coming out trans. AP reports that JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics, has done a study to try and assess how many children, patients, ages 8 to 17 received gender-affirming care. The data ranges from 2018 to 2022, 5 years. 2022 was the last year I think that they could get the full data as they were doing this study. Only 926 adolescents with a gender-related diagnosis received puberty blockers over that 5-year period. Not 9,000, not 900,000, 926. That's less than 20 kids per state over a 5-year period. Also during that time, about double that, almost 2,000 received hormones. Again, this is from ages 8 to 17. This is over a 5-year period. The research has found that no patients under the age of 12 were prescribed hormones. So only kids 12 to 18, 2,000 of them over the course of 5 years. Study did not look at surgeries. Other researchers have found those procedures are extremely rare. That's relative to the incredibly rare amount of kids who are actually getting gender-affirming care and medications. And what that suggests, if it's not explicit, is that there are safeguards, that this isn't being done willy-nilly.
Yeah. That Johnny's not going to school and coming back Jill or whatever, like Donald Trump has been saying.
It's not a new industry. Yeah, they're just sending kids to
even the people who supposedly are like, listen, I'm for trans rights, but I'm just concerned that we are castrating, the children, and we are ruining children's lives willy-nilly.
We are not.
Cite the actual data. You can tell me that there's one whistleblower who ends up being considered a freak by everybody who came in touch with her at a hospital, causing bomb threats everywhere, saying that the procedures were too lax. But the actual data tells a completely different story.
Yep.
And not to mention the studies that show that the people who receive this care almost overwhelmingly, but almost totally, we're happy they engaged in this care. And you can't find any medical procedure or any, frankly, psychological treatment
and this
that has any better rate of less regret. So, I mean, this is really important stuff to understand.
Right. And this is very similar data to the one that Joe Rogan pulled up some years ago. I guess it was just 2 years ago at this point when Matt Walsh came on to promote this documentary, where he was saying that there were millions of children in this country undergoing trans-affirming care. And this is somebody who supposedly toiled over this data and did a whole documentary about it. When you see the reality of these numbers, just be clear, like, these are not people operating in good faith. They're smear merchants directing hatred towards people because they can't deliver on their politics for a majority of Americans.
And when you engage in this culture war, all you're doing, you're not helping children. You're not protecting children. All you're doing is creating more hate. You're creating more suffering. You're helping right-wingers. And you're perpetrating lies and aggrievement and just demonizing the next, cohort du jour that's going to be demonized by the right. That's all you're doing. All right. We got to get to Lee Hepner. He's senior legal counsel for the American Economic Liberties Project. Talk about net neutrality. A couple of words from our sponsors. I've talked about this many times. I'm getting old. Starting to get a little thinning up top. Matt doesn't have to laugh that much.
I said something. I think the mic picked it up, but go ahead.
Oh yeah. Okay. So years ago, we got sent some Nutrafol to see if we want to have them sponsor the show. We ended up not using it. Since then, I've heard a ton of stories about people who had success with this, both male and female. So I started taking it, and it's been great. Hair is much more than what you see on the surface. It's a reflection of what's happening inside. Nutrafol targets the key root causes of your thinning hair and help you grow stronger, healthier strands from within. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1 million people. You will see thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Now, thinning hair is different for men and women, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men, multiple formulas for women that are tailored to different life stages, such as postpartum or menopause, lifestyle factors such as a plant-based lifestyle, etc., so you can get just what you need. It's physician-formulated, 100% drug-free ingredients. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting, again, these key root causes of thinning: stress, hormone, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, metabolism, through a whole body health. I don't know why I emphasize aging, but what are you going to do? The thing with Nutrafol is they don't just take tests of their ingredients. They test their final formulations. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men hair growth supplement for 6 months. 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol women hair growth for 6 months. With a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. You purchase online. You don't need a prescription. You get automated deliveries, free shipping, keep you on track, and you can save up to 20%. Start your hair growth journey today with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com. Enter the promo code TMR. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. We'll put the link in the description of the YouTube and podcast descriptions. Also, one of the things when you start having kids, maybe you get married, start to think about, I got to get my house in order a little bit. Even if you don't have that many assets, believe me, it's the New Year's. People make New Year's resolutions. Everybody gets determined to do it. And then by March, you forget to do it. Well, this resolution that you have to finally get a trust, or I should say, or will, or set up a trust, this is going to make it much easier for you. Right now, you can get 10% off at trustandwill.com/majority. I can tell you, it took me a long time to get a will after my first kid was born. But after I did, the anxiety level dropped precipitously. I don't have that many assets, but to have stuff like get caught up and not necessarily go where you think it's going to go. If there's a will, my father's an attorney. I've heard horror stories like this. Believe me, this is something you want to do. I don't have much experience with trusts, but trustandwill.com does. They could set you up. You can keep your family prepared and protected by managing your will or trust online. And here's the thing. Each will or trust is state-specific, it's legally valid, and it's customized to your needs. Care wishes, nomination guardians, final arrangements, power of attorney. You have kids who's, God forbid, these things are important. Ensure your family and loved ones avoid lengthy, expensive legal proceedings or the state deciding what happens to your assets. They got a simple step-by-step process. It guides you from start to finish, one question at a time. You will save loved ones time and stress by having all your documents in one place with bank-level encryption. They also have live customer support, phone, chat, email. Trust and Will has an overall rating of excellent and thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot. Trust and Will used by hundreds of thousands of families and counting. Check one of your goals off early this year with Trust and Will. Protect what matters most in minutes at trustandwill.com/majority. Get 10% off plus free shipping. That's 10% off free shipping at trustandwill.com/majority. And also, lastly, new sponsor, Remy. I know a lot of folks clench their teeth at night. They grind them. You don't even know you're doing it. I am one of those people.
Me too.
If you have jaw pain or headaches after a night's sleep, good chance you're grinding your teeth. Sometimes you can know it as a bruxism or TMJ. It's generally caused by stress, which I think a lot of people probably have these days. It can cause serious damage. It erodes away your enamel. It gives you broken teeth. It can lead to expensive dental bills. And the solution is protecting your teeth with a mouth guard. Mouth guards from a dentist, however, will cost you anywhere from $500 to $800. I think even more in New York, frankly. The good news is there's Remy. Remy makes dental grade professional quality mouth guards without the painful price tag. They're up to 80% cheaper than what you'd pay at the dentist. They don't require a dental visit. The process is super simple. I just went through this. I'm not getting mouth guards. I got retainers. But I've chewed my retainers up. And getting it from the dentist is like incredibly expensive. And this process, super simple. They send you a package. You mix together 2 lumps of clay, essentially. You put it into their mouth guards. They get, a small and large size. You just figure out beforehand what you want. There's an instructional video with a QR code. You do it once. It takes about a total of 10 minutes. You take some pictures of it. They let you know within 24 hours that you've done it the proper way. Then you do one more so that you have 2. So they get it really right. You drop it in a bag that they provide you with a label they provide you. You send it off. They send you the thing. Super easy. And it has a 45-night satisfaction guarantee. You can try it risk-free. You'll sleep better. You decide if it's the perfect fit. Remy has got you covered. Remy is for anyone dealing with nighttime grinding, clenching, or jaw pain, or wants to replace their, their retainer. It's an affordable solution to protect your smile, say goodnight to jaw pain and headaches. Head to shopremy.com/majority. Use the code majority. You'll save up to 50%. That's 50% off at shopremi.com/majority with code majority. Give your teeth a break without breaking the bank with Remy. Quick break, and we'll be talking to Lee Hepner. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Lee Hepner, Senior Legal Counsel for the American Economic Liberties Project. So, Lee, before we talk about specifically this injunction, or essentially like ruling from the Sixth Circuit on net neutrality, give us a little history about this, because there's a long history about this net neutrality going back as far as I can remember from the Bush years. And then there was a lot of drama during the Obama years over this, and 3 million comments coming into the FCC essentially got Obama's FCC chair, who was a former Verizon executive, to basically say, we got to do net neutrality because I can't pretend like it doesn't make total sense.
Yeah, I mean, you want to go back to 1936? This has been this notion of open networks and sort of fair communication networks has been kicking around for quite a long time, and really it's why the Federal Communications Commission was created during the New Deal era, was to really preserve the openness and the neutrality of communication systems. And, I don't think that they were thinking about the internet at the time, but they were thinking about wire communications. They were thinking about radio. And so when you come back to when the Communications Act was amended in 1996, that's when you really get into the meat of how this is going to apply to the internet. And you're right, this has been a ping pong over the course of a few administrations. The debates were really heating up during G.W. Bush 1, but even then, you see the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, telling telephone service providers and internet service providers that they can't block their competitors from offering a service on these communications networks. There was a really prominent order in 2005 from the FCC that kind of laid the groundwork. But in the past decade or so, this is when you see in 2015, Obama's FCC adopting the open internet rule, which is really the FCC's adoption formally of net neutrality. You see that shift back under Trump when FCC Chair Ajit Pai kind of flips the other way and overturns the open internet rule with this restoring internet freedom kind of euphemistic pivot back to sort of the privatization of this network. And then in 2024, last year, is when the FCC under Biden, again, restores this principle of net neutrality, which leads to the conflict over that, which came to us to the Sixth Circuit last week.
Okay, so there's two things I want to just go over. I mean, broadly speaking, I want you to talk about what does it mean when we say net neutrality. But I also, before we go in this, and back in the day, I could remember the Category 1 implications and the Category 2 implications of the Federal Communications Act, and I can't. It escapes me at the moment, but I want, as you describe, what net neutrality means in sort of like layperson's terms. I just want people to think in the back of their head and have this in their head. When they think of the internet, do they perceive it as a communications network, or is it just sort of like, I don't know, the way that they would look at like a billboard? I guess that they would drive by, like where it's just presentational.
Right. That's a great way of thinking about it. I mean, so essentially what net neutrality is getting at is this notion that a public information network, a utility like internet service, should be treating all types of content, sites, websites, platforms equally. This allows the network to carry, every form of information, support every kind of application, and not to discriminate between them. And the notion here is really that innovation among the edge providers, the billboards, if you will, the websites, the platforms that put content onto the internet to reach end users, to reach consumers, that innovation among edge users is going to be better, is going to deliver cooler things if the network itself is kind of dumb, if it serves everybody neutrally and is not adapting to, say, the biggest tech platform in the room's needs and services to the exclusion of their competitors. There are some other kind of lay ways of understanding what a neutral network looks like. Think about an electricity grid. One of the common examples is that the electricity grid doesn't care what brand refrigerator you plug into it. They don't even care whether you're plugging in a toaster or a microwave. Now, certainly there are rate implications, and there's a whole nother conversation to be had about how to regulate rates on an electricity grid. Or think about like a road, a freeway, that doesn't care what kind of car you're driving onto it or the kind of tires that you're using onto it. That's kind of the principle of a neutral network.
And let me just use the negative example where, let's say you're a Con Ed customer, and they decide to get into the toaster business, and their toasters actually, if you use our toaster, it's a smart toaster, and we know you're using it, you're going to get reduced electrical rates. And all of a sudden they're going to move their toasters, and anybody else is in the toaster business, they're going to be out of luck because no one's going to want to use it because the operating costs are going to be that much more expensive. Verizon at one point wanted to roll out a music service, and if they had the ability to throttle essentially other music services, Spotify, whatever it was at any given point during the day, where your music had to keep buffering if you were not using Verizon's music platform, nobody would, you wouldn't have any other alternate music platforms. So this is crucially important to a service. And I mean, personally, I think the answer should be we can get rid of all of this question by just nationalizing it. Everybody gets an internet from the government, and then you want to provide services on it, then you can go to town. But the FCC, like you say, it's been ping pong back and forth under the Biden administration, reinforced net neutrality rules. Tell us about the Sixth Circuit, because this audience, if we've been successful, what we've tried to do over the past 10 years, understands the words Chevron deference doctrine.
Oh, good.
And how this is implicated.
Sure. So I think it's important to let's consider, before we get to the Sixth Circuit, before we talk about Loper-Bright and the repeal of Chevron deference, that two opinions out of the District of Columbia Circuit Court have approved of the FCC's initial action adopting net neutrality in 2015, and then again approved the FCC's change of course in 2017. And it's that principle of judicial deference to administrative agencies that has changed since then. And that shift is very present in what the Sixth Circuit did just last week. And the notion,
So I just want to highlight this. So under the Biden administration, I should say under the Obama administration, the court said the FCC has the power to make this assessment. Under the what was it? Under the Trump administration, the court said the FCC still has the power to make this assessment, even if it reverses what it done in the past, because this is the FCC's purview.
Right. And it's because this is a vague statute in some ways. I mean, we can parse the language and it's actually kind of tricky. But the policy of the courts was to say, we're going to be deferential to an agency's permissible interpretation of that language. And in each of those cases, even those interpretations were, inapposite to each other, those were permissible interpretations of the law. That's not the way the court is going to treat it anymore. And you see what happened with Loper-Bright, this enormous Supreme Court decision from last year that overturned this principle of Chevron deference, is that now what the court is going to do is read and adopt their best reading of the statute. So the court is going to have now the final word on what Congress meant in this kind of squishy language, even though Congress delegated to the administrative agency to interpret that language. So I think what we're seeing here is a judicial power grab, really, where the judiciary is now having the final say on the best reading of a statute, even if what they're doing is making a line call about a statute that is, kind of maybe deliberately a little bit vague.
Right. They cited specifically in that opinion in the Sixth Circuit that, quote, is we can no longer afford deference to the FCC's reading of the statute, which is explicitly for taking Loper-Bright and applying it to this. And one of the judges of these three on this circuit was on the short list, Raymond Kethledge, for Amy Coney Barrett or Brett Kavanaugh, right? So this is a big part of the audition process, as we're probably going to get Thomas and Alito stepping aside for someone who's, 12 years old and already a part of the conservative judicial apparatus. This is auditioning for the conservative judiciary machine, basically.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's really the way most Americans think how the judiciary should operate. This is not this is not a political audition, and yet that's exactly what is happening. You see, I think in the wake of Loper-Bright, we're going to see a lot more judicial activism because the judiciary has been thrust into this role of having to decide policy nationally. And that's not really been the role of the judiciary. That's kind of counter to our entire system of separation of powers, of democratic accountability in our society. The Sixth Circuit opinion is really the first big opinion since Loper-Bright to shine a bright light on this, but we're going to see a lot more of it.
All right. So, Lee, there's a couple of things I just want to make, clarify for people, because The words judicial activism, I haven't heard really used that much since the aughts, when conservatives were complaining that's supposedly what the liberal judges were doing. There is a fundamental difference between interpreting the law, which is the job of judges, right? When there is a question of a law's vagueness. But this is a second order interpretation because within the law is already Congress's delegation of making these determinations to the FCC or any given agency. Congress can't sit down and say, these are all the things that could be making water dangerous to drink, because they don't know them. We don't know the new chemicals that may be dumped into a river. We don't know in the future. You need to provide the scientists and the professionals who work at the EPA the ability to make this assessment. This is also what the FCC was delegated to do under this, was like, you make this assessment as to, how the internet functions on any given situation. And now the court's stepping in with their own. So if the Sixth Circuit can do this, can, I don't know, the DC Circuit weigh in with a different opinion? And would we have different FCC abilities in different circuits unless it went to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And it's one that we're grappling with in a few different contexts, where you see, for instance, when the FTC adopts a non-competes rule, different topic, but a court, setting aside that rule nationally, a district court, a federal district court, what is the implication of that for other district courts that aren't necessarily bound by a sister court? You could be, encountering the same thing here, where you might see, you theoretically could see a different circuit court saying, hey, actually, we think the best reading of this is that broadband ISPs are a telecommunications service and a public utility. We're not bound by the Sixth Circuit, and we don't agree with their reading of the statute. Theoretically, you could see that happen. I suspect that it won't, and that if you follow the thread, the real imperative here is for Congress to act and correct this. And maybe that's the kind of desired end game for some of the corporate powers who are pulling some of the political strings here, is that, Congress has demonstrated an inability to act on major issues affecting corporate power. And so putting the onus back on Congress to govern is really, a good position for the broadband ISPs to be in.
And particularly because it's also setting precedents, like I say, across other industries and other regulatory agencies. This one might be just like a sort of a binary. Are they a communication network, or are they some type of presentational network, an information service, as opposed to a communication service? That may be somewhat binary, but like I say, this is setting a precedent across all sorts of different agencies. Now, this, we knew this would happen after Loper Bright, and we're seeing it into play. All right, last question for you. California, for instance, has a very strong net neutrality rule.
Yeah.
Is it possible that when you have a market share like California has, or like New York, will that implicate the national policy going around by these providers, or is our provider network so sort of like disaggregated in some way, and not decentralized, but just sort of like patched together, that it won't implicate something like net neutrality?
I mean, this is the real Civil War, isn't it? So, but delegating these policy decisions to the states is the other big opportunity here. And in 2017 or 2017, when Trump's FCC repealed net neutrality, right, California stepped in and said, hey, we're actually going to regulate. We're going to do what Congress has failed to do at the federal level. And we're going to say, as a matter of statute, that net neutrality is the law of the land in California, and we're going to have fair and open and neutral networks. Does the power of the purse, does the regulatory magnitude of California have a nationwide effect? I think arguably, maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's any more convenient for corporations to, have a patchwork compliance regime. It might be easier for them just to adopt one. On the other hand, there's a really significant financial incentive here for corporations to make a lot of money by exploiting the control that they can now exert over broadband ISPs at the state level. I mean, that decision in 2005 by the Republican FCC under George W. Bush that I mentioned, that was actually as to a local ISP that had tried to block access to an internet phone service provider. So some of this stuff is actually local at the broadband ISP level, and those integrations between big tech and more local broadband ISPs, they're not going to care what California did if they're sitting in a state that has not stepped in and adopted net neutrality.
All right, one last question. I lied about the last one being last question. Is there, are we going to see, it seems to me, I mean, and people forget that the Chevron deference doctrine was originally a case brought by essentially environmental activists who were forcing the EPA to do more, essentially to do more regulation and uphold regulation. And the court at that time said, you got to defer to the EPA. It was actually Gorsuch's mom was the head of the EPA at that time. Are we going to start to see more actions like this, where people are going to go to courts in circuits that are friendly towards regulation, and people are going to say the EPA is not doing their job, or the DHS is not interpreting this law on immigrants properly, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And are we going to see these courts start to impose, sort of like keep the Trump administration from running their agencies like they want to?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, you're totally right that this is not a partisan issue. The nature of administrative rulemaking and judicial oversight or intervention or repeal of administrative rulemaking was actually a huge burden to Trump's first term agenda, as it was during Biden's agenda over the past 4 years. And we're likely to see a lot more challenges again. I mean, the other big Supreme Court opinion that came out in the last session is a decision called Corner Post, which actually makes subject to challenge any rule that an administrative agency has ever adopted. So ordinarily, you could only challenge a rule, during a statute of limitations period that ran from the point at which the rule was adopted. Now you can challenge an administrative rule anytime after you, a private company, has been harmed by the rule. So it really restarts the clock to challenge any number of administrative rules. So you see the administrative agenda over the past, several decades now on the chopping block. I think we're going to see a lot more challenges, and we're really seeing a sea change in what the administrative state can do.
Lee Hepner, Senior Legal Counsel for the American Economic Liberties Project. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, who has done a couple of pieces around basically focusing on AP3, which is the American Patriot 3% militia, and has just come out with a piece basically telling about his source. His main source for this was a guy who just on his own went undercover for like 2 years. We'll be right back with more on that. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, on really, it's two pieces. The first you put out, I think it was in August or sometime over the summer, Armed and Underground Inside the Turbulent Secret World of an American Militia. And this was, you had a lot of reporting and a lot of like pictures and stuff that you could only get from somebody on the inside. And just the other day, I guess it was 2 days ago, you wrote the story of the mole in this militia. But let's just start with who is AP3, and give us a sense of both like who they are in and of themselves, but also in the broader context, particularly sort of like in the wake of January 6th.
Yeah. So AP3, American Patriots 3%, is what you'd call a 3%er group. And that might be a term that people are a little more familiar with. It's kind of, there's a few 3%er groups. They all are in this kind of loose coalition. And they're, one of the main strains of the far right these days, of the kind of organized militia style far right these days.
What does 3% stand for?
And 3% is, it's a reference to this claim that only 3% of Americans fought in the American Revolution. And so it's this kind of idea that a small group of committed people can, by force of arms, stand up against tyranny. And they think that holds today. And so American Patriots 3% has long been one of the largest militias in the U.S. And after January 6th, some of the biggest, a little more famous militias, they had their top leaders go to prison because of the Capitol riot. But in part because of dumb luck, in part because of some various decisions that their leaders made, AP3 was never publicly connected to the riot. And so they, I think, gave this real case study of what's happening with the broader movement between these two historic presidential elections, 2020 and 2024.
And I just want to fill in some of these details. It's fascinating about, from your reporting, which is, when we talk about these other groups, Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys were sort of the most prominent. And these guys in AP3, they were like, we're going in on the inauguration. And so we're keeping our powder dry. And in fact, had a specific edict: do not wear your AP3 patches. There were AP3ers there, but do not wear your AP3 patches, essentially your uniforms, at this, because this is not an event that we're going to be formally doing. We're keeping our powder dry, as it were, for the inauguration. And so what I found fascinating about your reporting, and then we'll get to the mole himself, but what I found fascinating from your first piece in August was the impact, like the material impact the law enforcement reacting to January 6th had on the militia movement, at least initially, in those first years. Like, I mean, I would not necessarily have predicted that. But tell us about that. And also tell us about the trajectory of like sort of membership across AP3, and to the extent that you're aware of, like in the broader militia movement in the ramp up to January 6th, 2020, because I'm trying to get a sense of like, and I know this is the broad question you ask in all your pieces, is like, what now? Like, does Trump like satiate this itch, or does it encourage it?
No, those are fantastic questions. I mean, the militia movement came in really strong to January 6th. They're coming off of 2020, where between the COVID lockdowns and the Black Lives Matter protests following the murder of George Floyd, and then the election, and Trump claims that it's stolen. These are all incredibly energizing moments for the movement. I mean, these kind of they really thrive on these ideas that there is some kind of something incredibly dark happening in this country, and the authorities are either asleep at the wheel and in on it. That's when they grow. That's when they do militant actions. That's when they're out in the streets with guns. And so they're riding this high, and that there's a direct line between that, all of that, building up to January 6th and the storming of the Capitol. And then after January 6th, there's this massive crackdown from the DOJ, from social media companies. And also, I think it's easy to forget at this point, for a stretch of time, the rioters, the militias, they were pariahs even in conservative politics. Trump, immediately after the riot, Trump was incredibly condemning of the people who committed violence that day, at least relative to he is now. And so these militias, their membership was plummeting. People were quitting. They were afraid of the consequences. They're afraid of being ostracized in their communities for being part of a militia. And the leaders of these groups, who are tend to be very macho, but they were afraid that the movement would not survive, that the backlash would be too strong, and they'd experience something like they experienced after the Oklahoma City bombing in the 90s, which is a stretch of like a decade where there's essentially no active militia movement in this country. And that all, that's a long way of, think they were at this real low point, but then things started to really turn around. And there's a few factors there that are interesting. I think probably the most important one is simply this change in the political climate. You started having Trump and other prominent Republican politicians changing their tune about the Capitol riot and starting to embrace the rioters as patriots, as political prisoners. And suddenly you start having people joining, rather than quitting because of January 6th, you have people joining militias saying, January 6th inspired me to join. And so AP3 started expanding at a dramatic pace again until it got to the point where they're getting so many new recruits that they were really struggling to keep up.
And you paint this in your piece about how these groups have a fluidity. It's not like you're a member of this group and only this group. There's like a bit of connectivity, and it's not full membership, but you can move from one militia group to the other, I guess. And what was fascinating was that, and we will, as Sam's been saying, get to the mole, but that this person who you were working with slept in the home of the man who was, I think, one of the heads of the Oath Keepers in the wake of Enrique Tarrio getting arrested by the feds. I'm not sure if this is directly connected, but he was arrested right before January 6th. And now Donald Trump is saying that he's going to pardon him or look into that case into pardoning the January 6ers. So like Trump himself, his reelection and his promises to pardon these people, it seems to have a direct line in terms of this energy picking back up again. I guess if you could expand on Trump's role with and him as a figurehead, not just with this militia, but with the whole right-wing militia culture more broadly.
No, absolutely. I mean, these militias, it is incredibly advantageous to these militias and for them to blur the line between their culture and the mainstream of the Republican Party. That's when they grow, and that's when they feel emboldened, when they start taking more public facing actions. There's a version of this where these are a bunch of guys that just spend their time in the woods, and they're not actually doing things that have an impact on anyone else. Especially since Trump's election in 2016, they've gotten a lot more active. And so these pardons, the ramifications could be massive. There is no precedent for that kind of message of protection and support, especially coming from the White House. If the pardons are as sweeping as Trump has repeatedly during his campaign suggested they might be, if they include, even people who were convicted of assaulting police officers on January 6th in brutal ways. That experts in national security officials, feel that could be will be interpreted as a license for more extreme action, is essentially saying that you can commit even serious crimes and go unpunished if you do them for the quote unquote right cause. And that's a very, very dangerous message right now.
There was a couple of things I was struck by. At one point, the idea of how big of an umbrella. I mean, in the early 90s, when I was doing stand-up, I had a bit about somebody quitting the white Aryan nation to join the new white resistance front because the white Aryan nation didn't have a good dental plan. It didn't hate Puerto Ricans enough. But that's literally what's going on here, that there are some bigots who are like, Muslims are the biggest problem. Others are like, it's really Antifa or Black Lives Matter. I mean,
Women.
They all have their favorite sort of like boogeymen. And they, but this AP3, they have a big tent in that regard. Talk about that, because I found that sort of fascinating. They're like, as long as you, at the end of the day, it's white people. Is it white people for AP3, or is it what is the tent pole?
I mean, it's a great question. It's incredibly ill-defined. This what you would think would be the obvious question if you're going to go through, take the rather strange step of joining militia, is what is the point of all of this? And they leave that very, very vague. And so what they have are these kind of shared grievances. There's I think the most common through lines are gun rights, quote unquote anti-white racism, and things like COVID restrictions. I mean, it's not that different from like grievances I think we're all very familiar with in the broader discourse.
Conservative grievances.
Yeah.
Conservative grievances. But these are just people who are convinced, who are just maybe a little bit more inclined. And I mean, most of the people you talk about and get insight to, they all seem to be, have some varying degree. Now, obviously, being an alcoholic and having conservative values does not necessarily, you're not going to join a militia.
Of course, yeah.
But there's a combination of of things, and the sense that like they're the last vanguard, or that nobody else understands what's going on or something.
Yeah, no, there's this sense that somehow by doing this, that they will be able to change the direction of the country. And really the trademark of this group, the thing that they all do that unites them together, and this is true for basically every militia, is paramilitary training. This incredibly, like this very militaristic, getting ready to, doing things like practicing storming buildings with semi-automatic rifles and doing ambushes with improvised explosives. But because they have such a wide tent, there's not, really even, they don't agree what the purpose of that is. And so you get in this situation where, there are these constant, very heated debates of amongst the group's leaders of, at what point should we escalate this? Is this now the time to commit mass political violence? And it's always, I mean, I think this is like kind of the it's like this low boil menace that's at the heart of the movement. It's kind of constant, because sometimes that boils over into things that have massive real world consequences, but it's really unpredictable. And at least in AP3's case, those debates have gotten more intense as time has gone on. It's gotten, more radical, to the point where longtime members of the group were quitting because they were scared about all this talk about terrorism.
Well, and also the mole that you worked with, he came to that group, and I guess perhaps this might be a good transition to that part of your story. He came to this group initially as somebody who I know had a record in the past, perhaps wasn't finding his purpose in life and in society in the same way. And I mean, maybe that's what some of those other militia members have too, if they're troubled or if they're on the fringes a little bit of society. But he took it the opposite way and decided to, oh no, this group is dangerous and I'm going to speak out about it, which is a fascinating transition.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed like somebody who could have easily gone either way, and I think you write in there that they saw something of them in me. Like he had some of that. It just so happens, and maybe it was because he was gay, that he had just like one other sort of perspective that made him sort of like them, but not like them.
Yeah, I mean, and his politics are, they're radical in their own way, I think, but they're different. He is kind of a idiosyncratic leftist libertarianism, I think, is his broad worldview. And so there's certainly some overlap with the militia guys, a lot of meaningful differences. But I mean, as he tells it, he was a wilderness survival instructor after he got out of prison, this kind of like extreme wilderness survival, and crossed paths with this group through that. Didn't like the experience, decided to just move on. This was back in 2019. A couple years go by, and then January 6th happens, and he is outraged and disgusted and feels ashamed with himself for having helped the group in some small way, and so decides to try to do something and basically go on an undercover operation of his own devising as this sort of freelance vigilante. And then that becomes, something he does for over 2 years with the rather stunning degree of success.
Yeah, it's fascinating story. But one thing going back that maybe this from the first piece, Scott Seddon, who was the head of the AP3 at that time. What I found really interesting was that his success in recruiting seemed to be on a one-to-one relationship with Facebook moderation. Will you talk about that? Because we just heard yesterday from Mark Zuckerberg and his $900,000 watch, apparently, that that they are going to, like, it's free speech is back on, but as Seddon basically, or your reporting says that Seddon saw Facebook throttle them and it hurt, but then saw it come back around the same time that Trump and the Republicans started saying that January 6th, it was just a bunch of tourists.
Right. No, that was the other key factor here in these groups being able to resurge. And it was, Seddon talked about Facebook as their greatest weapon. This was what got them. This was what made an idea that a kind of burnout, essentially, like a guy who jumped between all sorts of, he was a model, he's had this like very surprising backstory for paramilitary leader, one of the most successful in the country. But he was really good at using Facebook early on. And that was, I think, part of why he was able to expand this into something that eventually had, likely tens of thousands of people in it. And then after January 6th, the social media companies, including Meta, were really cracking down on paramilitary organizing. And this meant that when people were quitting the group, it was really impossible for them to rebuild their coffers and to reach a wide enough audience to actually be a meaningful national force. And so they were trying other things. They were, going around the state.
Joshua, let me just stop here, because I think this is important for people to note, because we are led to believe that what they experienced is really almost impossible to do. Like, Facebook does not have the ability to surgically go in and inhibit a cohort that is, promulgating stuff like this. But apparently, according to that cohort, Facebook does have that ability when they deem it, when they're influenced by the exact same things that other people who may or may not want to join that group are, in terms of like public shame and like, oh, this is militias, right-wing militias are on the outs right now. So we're going to impose that. And then, like you say, the militia goes out and Facebook sort of like relaxes it to the point where Seddon was aware of what was going on. Like he could see it in the how his posts traveled.
No, absolutely. I mean, these guys were, as worried as they were about the Department of Justice, they talked a lot more and with a lot more, I think, concern about Facebook in this time when they were talking about, like, is our militia going to be able to survive? I mean, this was a crisis for them because they just, suddenly they were having to do, kind of trying to recruit by handing out business cards at stores. And then suddenly, as you said, I mean, over time, they started realizing, oh, well, we can just do this. Like this is working again. Suddenly, we're getting people again. Suddenly, my account's been up and I've posted all these things, and my account's still up for months on end. We can be more bold again. And they're constantly testing this and discussing it and trading kind of observations about it. And so then eventually, they're getting as many as 50 people applying each day, which does not take very long to add up to a huge wave of recruits.
And that 50, is that nationally, or is that like in terms of like different regions? And this is one specific group.
Yeah, that's nationally, like 50 a day. So, I mean, these groups are, in the thousands or tens of thousands. They're not, this is not, million strong, but it's like they can have a quite significant force in terms of ability to do operations. I mean, the difference in terms of, the difference between a 500 person group and a 10,000 person group is, I think, that sort of momentum shift that happens when you're getting that large, I think has something to do with why we had January 6th, that these groups were at a really high point and they were feeling incredibly emboldened. And so maybe not everyone wanted to go and storm the Capitol who was in these organizations, but enough did.
And the premise of their whole operation is that we just need a few people who are super committed to do this. The other aspect that I found also fascinating and troubling is the way their relation. I mean, there's a lot of ex-cops in there. You talk about one OBGYN who was at the Cleveland Clinic and then apparently left because. But talk about that relationship, because a North Carolina sheriff comes up, Oklahoma City Police come up in this. They seem to. There's a very sophisticated understanding of like where the lines are of where who can do what and what the value is, and we don't want to burn these resources, type of thing.
Yeah, these groups view building good relationships with law enforcement as kind of fundamental for their success. One of the main things that they do is, do vigilante operations that put them in very volatile situations with a lot of guns. And if the police aren't going to actively support them, they want them to at least leave them alone. They're hoping that they will at least see them as friends. And so they put, I was aware that there's an unusual number of police officers in militias, but being able to see the tactics and the playbook and the sheer amount of effort that these militias put into building these ties, it's kind of like a business school group project. Like they have like all of these marketing tactics, and they trade tips for how to pitch it to your local sheriff and how to kind of rope in ex-police officer. In AP3, members receive spreadsheets from leadership with a list of every sheriff in their state, so they can mark who's friendly and who's not. And we're told to reach out to everyone and report back. Like it's a very it's this long running and sometimes goofy, but organized and sometimes rather sophisticated effort to build these ties as widely as they possibly can.
Do you have a sense of how well trained they are in terms of like a fighting force? So clearly they say like, okay, we know in this given state that we have good relationship with this sheriff. So if there's a BLM protest there, just as an example, this is the place where we go and do our counter protest or our, assault or whatever it's going to be, because we know the sheriff is less inclined to interfere or may actually support us. But when they actually get into this thing, like, how sophisticated is their training?
I think it varies. I don't want to, it's scary. I've watched a lot of these videos. It's, a lot of these people are military veterans. It's also, vastly disproportionately represented in these groups. And so there's a lot of people with, official training and combat experience who's training other people. And so it's not like every one of these aren't super soldiers. But, these trainings they do aren't, using a pistol at the range. Like it's shooting a target with a sniper rifle from half a mile. That's a really long shot. There's these kind of organized efforts of like how do we as a group with rifles storm into a building, break this door down, search this, search this, search this. It's and so I'm not honestly an expert in evaluating, their firearms capacity, but it's, I think the Trump assassination attempt was about, 150 or so yards. It's, half a mile is way, way longer than that. That's a dangerous length to be able to shoot if you have the wrong intentions.
Well, this is fascinating reporting. I hope that particularly both the implications of the way the Republicans started to shift their rhetoric on January 6th. And frankly, the Facebook part of this, it seems to be incredibly relevant right now. It indicates to me that both, Facebook has an awareness of what they're doing, and also the implications of, like, when we talk about radicalization from these social media accounts. I don't know any better example. We're going to put links to both pieces, both the Armed and Underground and the Militia and the Mole at majority.fm and the podcast and YouTube description. Joshua, really, again, congratulations. This is great work. I just also want to note, like, he sent out this information to a lot of people, and you were the only one who, sort of followed up. And I know you guys, just from my own experience, must get like, dozens of these over the course of any given period of time. And it's hard to follow these up because more often than not, they go nowhere. But congratulations to you, your persistence and your reporting. Really well done.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Great chatting with you both.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the so-called fun half of the program. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. When you become a member of the Majority Report, you get the free show free of commercials. Right now, like, we got a lot of commercials. The beginning of the year is, I don't know, it's strange. Usually we have less at the beginning of the year, but things got backed up from last year. People still, I guess, had some Q1 ad money. I don't know how it works, but I do know enough to say
CNBC
Q1.
Sam over
I'd like a little credit for that. I'm quite aware there are 4 quarters to the fiscal year. So
check my portfolio.
Exactly. Hold on for 1 second. I just need to see how Bitcoin's doing. But you can be a member of this show and help this show survive and thrive in 2025. Didn't even know that was going to rhyme like that. Didn't even know it. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. Your support, honestly, is what keeps this show afloat and allows us to do, an interview on the Sixth Circuit ruling for net neutrality. Not a lot of shows are going to be covering that specific general shows are going to be covering that ruling, and then bounce over to the Militia and Zuckerberg. We got some other clips that are going to be relevant in terms of Zuckerberg to play, because this whole Facebook thing, we are watching this in real time, from the Washington Post pulling their endorsement. I don't know that endorsements mean anything, but it's really more the motivation that is important. And watching.
Did you see that Bezos and Amazon are giving Melania Trump a $40 million deal to do a documentary about her?
Jesus.
Be best.
I am so interesting.
I want to see how she chose like the aesthetic for the Christmas celebrations when Trump was in the White House. That looked like
It was a reflection of my mood and my lack of love for my husband.
The best is that she's just going to have her assistant shoot it on an iPhone and pocket, $39.5 million or whatever it is.
I threw you off, but that was yesterday, right? Just another, Bezos, Tim Cook, Zuckerberg donating $1 million to his inaugural fund. Like, give the king a gift.
This is like, when Sanders would talk about oligarchy, I'm thinking of that. What's the name of those guys out of Princeton who did the research paper that showed, whenever there was a conflict in Congress, that wealthy people's preferences would win out.
Oh, right. I remember that study.
This is a study about 10, 12 years ago. But the nakedness and sort of low rentness of our oligarchy. So, almost overnight, it feels like this quality of it. It was Gillen's, right. And Page, who did that study. Thank you. The low rent quality of this oligarchy, like this is, it's not 1-to-1, but in the wake of the Soviet Union collapsing, there was a little bit of a window, but rather quickly it turned into an oligarchy, where, Putin had this relationship with these billionaires, helped them become billionaires. The billionaires helped him maintain his power. Putin a little maybe stronger in some respects because of the nature of the society relative to the oligarchs, right? Like, Donald Trump does not have the capacity, it seems to me, to go and send the FBI over to arrest Elon Musk, or to, have him accidentally fall out a window or something like that. So really, in many respects, our oligarchs are more powerful than the ones in states that we associate with oligarchs. But it is so naked. It is so incredibly naked.
Right. And go ahead.
It's disturbing and fascinating.
Well, it's incredible to see these powerful people shaking in their boots, whether it's Morning Joe or even Zuckerberg, who, like, I feel like these tech companies have reached their natural endpoint of growth, and all they can do is sell more data to people. They're trying to get more users on the platform as well, right?
Well, and now they're going to military contracts to make up for the lack of profitability.
Exactly. So it's all like they had the gimmicks with the metaverse and the glasses that are $3,000 and only rich people can afford as the virtual reality. So, like, they're at their limit in terms of practical things that they can provide, services that they can provide. And so they are highly susceptible, and they have a duty to their shareholders, and they don't want to lose all this money, to basically try to grow in any way they can. And the best way they can do that is bribery.
Yeah. I also would say that there's just a psychopathic quality to people,
totally
trying to raise this amount of money. I mean, they are, I think, in a race to become the first trillionaire. I mean, they're lunatics. They're sociopaths.
Yep.
Does anybody not readily agree to the idea that the executive suite selects for sociopathy. Like that's a pretty common. Like ask a normal person. Like say, hey, do you think the average CEO, like John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test, posturized that or hypothesized that most of those people up on the top of these pyramids are psychopaths. I think it's just obvious.
Well, it's weird. Like we can accurately identify narcissism in our politicians, and I think our country has an easier time saying that. But because we worship capitalism in so many ways, it's like, and we create this idea that anybody is just one good business decision away from becoming one of the billionaires themselves. There's just this disconnect.
Yeah, we still think developers are going to say give us housing if we just don't zone them the wrong way.
Right.
Anyways, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee tea, or no fair trade coffee or hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate.
It's a co-op. You won't necessarily be fighting the oligarchs by getting just coffee, but you will get great coffee. You will support farmers in Africa and as well in like Chiapas and maybe Guatemala and other places, Central America, and a co-op and movement partners, justcoffee.coop. Emma, ESVN.
Bradley and I will be back tomorrow with our picks for the divisional round and our predictions for the playoffs, youtube.com/ESVN show. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning. Last night we had Luke Savage and Amina Sheikh on, both to talk about Canada in different sort of ways, and Pierre Poilievre, or whatever it is, how he's kind of a nerd, but also, if you're a Liberal Party and you've been in power for so long, and the only things you can say are fairly like trite things about how bad Pierre Poilievre is, as nobody can afford to like buy a house or pay cost of living. Like I think it's a similar kind of problem we're having here with the economy is already great argument you're hearing from certain types of Democrats. So check that out. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Claudia Scheinbaum mocking Donald Trump this morning at a press conference. I guess she basically said that now they're going to rename
But we got the video coming up.
We do? I thought we couldn't get a subtitled one. Oh, well, Bradley found it. All right. So spoiler alert. The point is good contrast with Canada. That's all I'll say. And the liberals there versus Morena down in Mexico.
We will see you in the fun half. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid though.
Common sense says, of course.
gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.